The city was quiet that night, the kind of calm that only came after midnight when most people were asleep and only the streetlights kept watch. Inside a tall office building, a security guard sat at the front desk sipping from a cup of lukewarm tea. His name was Daniel. He had been working as a night guard for almost 7 years, and every night looked more or less the same. Long hours, quiet halls, and the steady hum of air conditioning echoing through the floors. Daniel wasn't a man of many words. People who worked in the building during the day knew him as polite, respectful, and always on time. He never complained about his job, even though it wasn't easy. The pay was modest and the hours were tough, but Daniel always said, "Work is work. As long as it's honest, I'm thankful for it." That simple attitude was what made him different. Every morning, when his shift ended, he walked home on the same route, past the bakery that opened early, across the small park where birds began to gather, and finally to a tiny apartment where his mother lived with him. His mother had been sick for a few years, and though her treatment was expensive, Daniel managed to take care of her without ever letting her know how hard it was on him. He often skipped meals or worked extra shifts, but he did it quietly. He believed that doing good without telling anyone about it was the right way to live. That night was no different. Around 2 in the morning, Daniel was making his usual round through the parking area. His flashlight beam moved across empty cars and shiny floors. Everything looked normal until something caught his eye near the entrance gate, a small black wallet lying on the ground. He bent down and picked it up. The wallet was heavy, and when he opened it, his eyes widened for a moment. Inside, there were several $1,000s in crisp bills, along with a few credit cards and a couple of business cards. Daniel stood still for a few seconds, looking at the money. He could already imagine how much it could help him. His mother needed new medicines, and the rent was due in a week. A small part of him thought about keeping it just for a moment, but then he sighed, closed the wallet, and said softly to himself, "It's not mine." Without another thought, he walked straight back to the front desk and wrote a report about the found item. He placed the wallet in the building's lost and found box and left a note for his supervisor. For Daniel, it was a small act of honesty, something that felt normal to him. But he didn't know that this simple choice would soon change his entire life. The next morning, when his shift ended, Daniel walked home like usual. The streets were waking up with the sound of traffic, shopkeepers opening shutters, and the smell of fresh bread from the bakery. He bought a small loaf for his mother and smiled when he saw her waiting by the window as he reached home. "You're up early again, Ma," he said, putting the bread on the table. "I can't sleep when you're out all night," she replied with a weak smile. "You must be tired." "I'm fine," he said softly. "You should eat something." He helped her to the table, poured her some tea, and sat down beside her. They talked about simple things, the weather, the neighbors, a stray cat that kept visiting the building. He never told her how hard things really were. To her, he wanted to look strong. Later that afternoon, Daniel went to bed for a few hours. He woke up in the evening, had some rice and vegetables, and got ready for another shift. As he buttoned his uniform, he looked in the mirror and smiled faintly. "Just one more day," he whispered, though he said that every day. He didn't complain. He just kept going. When Daniel reached the building that night, his supervisor called him over. "Hey, Daniel," the man said. "That wallet you turned in last night. Turns out it belonged to someone important. The guy came by this morning asking about it. He said he wants to thank you personally." Daniel frowned a little. "Oh, that's not necessary," he said quickly. "Anyone would have done the same." The supervisor chuckled. "Not everyone, Daniel. Anyway, he might come by tomorrow to meet you." Daniel nodded politely, but he didn't think much about it. To him, returning something that wasn't his was simply what decent people were supposed to do. The night went on as usual. He made his rounds, checked the security cameras, and greeted the janitor with a smile. Around midnight, as he sat at the desk reading an old newspaper, he thought about the man who had lost the wallet. "Must be nice," he murmured, "carrying that much money without worry." He shook his head and went back to his duty. The next evening, when Daniel arrived for his shift, a sleek black car was parked near the building entrance. A tall man in an expensive suit stepped out and walked straight toward him. "You must be Daniel," the man said, extending his hand with a warm smile. Daniel hesitated, slightly surprised, and shook his hand. "Yes, sir. Can I help you?" "I'm the owner of the wallet you found," the man said. "I can't thank you enough. I would have been in a mess if you hadn't turned it in. Daniel smiled politely. I'm just glad you got it back, sir. Anyone would have done the same. The man raised an eyebrow. That's where you're wrong, he said. Not everyone would return it, especially with that much cash inside. He pulled out an envelope from his pocket and held it out. Please take this. It's just a small thank you. Daniel stepped back and shook his head. I can't take it, sir. I didn't do it for a reward. The man looked at him surprised. Are you sure? Yes, sir, Daniel replied gently. It wasn't mine, that's all. I'm just doing my job. The man smiled faintly, clearly impressed. All right, he said, putting the envelope away. But I'd like to know more about you, Daniel. Do you work here full-time? Yes, sir. Mostly night shifts. I've been here a few years now. The man nodded thoughtfully. That must be hard. Daniel smiled again. It's all right. It helps me take care of my mother. That's all that matters. The man nodded again, his expression softening. You remind me of someone, he said quietly. Someone I used to know a long time ago. He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he just said, Well, thank you again, Daniel. You've restored a bit of my faith in people. Daniel nodded, not sure how to respond. You're welcome, sir. Have a good night. When the man left, Daniel went back to his desk, not realizing how deeply he had affected that stranger. He didn't know that this man, Mr. Collins, wasn't just an ordinary businessman, but a billionaire who had built his fortune from nothing. And for the first time in years, Mr. Collins had met someone who reminded him of the values he'd lost along the way. Honesty, humility, and kindness without expectation. That night, as Daniel walked home again, he felt calm. The streetlights flickered above and the cool air brushed against his face. He didn't think about rewards or recognition. He thought about his mother, probably asleep by now, and how lucky he was to still have her. He looked up at the night sky and whispered softly, Thank you for another day. Life for him was simple. Work hard. Do right, be kind. That was enough. But somewhere in the city, the man whose wallet he had returned was still thinking about him. About the quiet guard who had reminded him that decency still existed. And that thought was about to set in motion something Daniel could never have imagined. He reached home, quietly unlocked the door, and peeked inside. His mother was asleep on the sofa with the television still on. Daniel smiled and covered her with a blanket. Then he turned off the lights, sat by the window for a while, and watched the city lights in the distance. They looked like stars fallen to the ground, bright, distant, and full of mystery. He didn't know it yet, but one of those lights would soon shine directly on him, changing his life in a way he could never have dreamed of. The next few days passed quietly for Daniel. His life went on in the same simple rhythm, night shifts, morning walks home, caring for his mother, and resting during the day. He didn't think much about the man whose wallet he had returned. To him, it was just one of those small things that happened in life. He didn't know that far away. The same man, Mr. Collins, was thinking a lot about him. Mr. Collins was not just any man. He was the owner of several companies, a person whose name often appeared in newspapers and magazines. People saw him as a successful businessman, but few knew how lonely he had become over the years. His days were filled with meetings, travel, and numbers, but not many real people. That night when he met Daniel, something about the guard's calm and honest nature had stayed with him. He couldn't stop thinking about how a man with so little could carry himself with such dignity. One afternoon, while sitting in his office, Mr. Collins called his assistant and asked her to find out more about the security guard who worked in the downtown building. The assistant was surprised but didn't ask questions. A few hours later, she came back with a simple report. Daniel, 42 years old, working full-time night shifts, living with his sick mother in a small apartment outside the city center. No criminal record, no debts, no bad record at work. Everyone described him as hardworking and humble. Mr. Collins read the report slowly. He sat back in his chair, looking out the window at the busy city below. People rushed everywhere, cars honking, phones ringing, everyone chasing something. But Daniel's face came to his mind, calm and steady. It reminded him of his younger days, before the money, before success, when life was simpler and values were clearer. The next evening, Mr. Collins decided to visit Daniel again, not as a businessman this time, but as a man curious to know more about another human being. Around 10 p.m., he arrived at the building. Daniel, as always, stood near the front desk, checking the visitor log. When he saw Mr. Collins, he looked surprised but smiled politely. "Good evening, sir. You're here late." Mr. Collins smiled back. "I was nearby and thought I'd drop in. Do you mind if I sit for a bit?" "Of course not, sir," Daniel said, pulling out a chair. "Would you like some water or tea?" "Water will do," Mr. Collins replied. He sat down and looked around. The lobby was quiet, lit softly by the overhead lights. "You must get tired working nights like this," Daniel shrugged lightly. "Sometimes. But I'm used to it. Nights are peaceful. You see the city in a different way when everyone else is asleep." "That's true," Mr. Collins said with a smile. "I used to work nights too many years ago. I was trying to build my first company. Back then I thought once I made enough money I'd finally rest. But that never happened." Daniel looked at him curiously. "You don't seem like the type who'd stop working even if you could." Mr. Collins laughed softly. "You might be right. Maybe it's not about money anymore. Maybe it's about habit." Daniel nodded slowly. "It's the same with me, I guess. I don't think I could stop working either, even if I had the chance. It's just how I live now." There was a short silence, the kind that felt comfortable rather than awkward. Mr. Collins studied Daniel's face. There was something honest there, something steady and unshaken by the world's chaos. "Tell me, Daniel," he said quietly. "Why did you become a security guard?" Daniel smiled faintly. "It wasn't really a choice at first. My father was one too. He used to say a guard's job is to protect not just buildings, but trust. When he passed away, I took over the same kind of work. It felt right." "That's a beautiful way to think of it," Mr. Collins said sincerely. "Protecting trust." Daniel nodded. "I try to do that. It's not always easy, but it matters to me." Mr. Collins hesitated for a moment, then asked softly, "And your family?" "It's just me and my mother," Daniel said. "She's been unwell for a while now. That's why I work nights. I can take care of her during the day. It's not easy, but she's all I have." There was a pause. Mr. Collins could see the quiet strength in Daniel's eyes. It wasn't the kind of strength that came from muscles or power, but from patience and sacrifice. "I can see that she raised a good man," Mr. Collins said after a moment. "You know, when I lost my wallet, I wasn't just worried about the money. There were some documents in there I couldn't replace easily. If you hadn't turned it in, it would have caused real trouble for me." Daniel looked a little embarrassed. "I just did what anyone should do." "Not everyone would," Mr. Collins said softly. "That's what makes you different." Daniel didn't reply. He just smiled politely, but inside he felt a quiet warmth. Compliments were rare for him, and he didn't quite know how to respond to them. Before leaving, Mr. Collins stood up and said, "Thank you again, Daniel. I mean it. You reminded me that there are still honest people in this world." Daniel nodded. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." After Mr. Collins left, Daniel went back to his duties, unaware that this conversation had left a deep mark on the businessman's heart. Mr. Collins drove home, thinking about what Daniel had said about trust. It stayed with him all night. The next few weeks went by and Daniel returned to his usual routine. Every night he walked through the halls, checked the cameras, and greeted every janitor and cleaner with a smile. The people who worked with him respected him deeply, though he never demanded it. He treated everyone equally, from the manager to the cleaning staff. One rainy night, as Daniel stood near the entrance, a man rushed in, drenched from the downpour. "You must be freezing," Daniel said, offering the man a towel from the front desk. The man laughed. "You're too kind, Daniel. I'm fine." Daniel recognized him instantly. It was Mr. Collins again, this time without his usual expensive suit. He wore a simple jacket and jeans. "I didn't expect to see you tonight, sir," Daniel said, surprised. "I wanted to check on a few things," Mr. Collins said casually. "Mind if I keep you company for a while?" "Not at all," Daniel said, smiling. They talked for hours that night, about work, life, family, and everything in between. Mr. Collins asked Daniel questions about his childhood, his dreams, and even what he would do if he ever had a lot of money. Daniel laughed at that question. "I've never thought about it, sir. Maybe I'd buy my mother a small house by the park. She loves the sound of birds in the morning." Mr. Collins nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good dream," he said. "Simple but meaningful." Before leaving, Mr. Collins said something unexpected. "Daniel, I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to visit again sometime. Talking to you reminds me of what really matters." Daniel smiled. "You're welcome anytime, sir," And just like that, an unusual friendship began between the billionaire and the night guard. Mr. Collins would often drop by late at night, sometimes bringing coffee or snacks. They would sit together talking like old friends. Daniel never treated him like someone important. He spoke to him the same way he would speak to anyone else. That honesty was what Mr. Collins admired most. But what Daniel didn't know was that Mr. Collins had started to see him as something more than just a good man. He saw him as a mirror of the life he once lived. Before money and success had changed everything, watching Daniel's humble way of living reminded him that kindness and honesty were worth more than all the wealth in the world. One night, as Mr. Collins left the building, he stopped at the door and looked back at Daniel sitting at his desk reading a small book. He smiled to himself and whispered, "He doesn't even know how rare he is." As the days passed, Mr. Collins began to think of ways to do something meaningful for Daniel, something that could truly change his life. But he knew Daniel wouldn't accept charity easily. He would have to find a way that felt natural and fair. Daniel, meanwhile, remained completely unaware of what was coming. For him, life was simple. Do good, stay honest, keep faith. He didn't realize that his humility had touched the heart of a man powerful enough to rewrite his story. And in the quiet nights that followed, as the rain tapped gently on the glass doors and Daniel stood watch over the building, fate was quietly preparing to reward him in a way he could never have imagined. It had been almost a month since Daniel first met Mr. Collins, and by now their short conversations had turned into something more like a quiet friendship. Mr. Collins often visited the building late at night, usually when the world outside was asleep. Sometimes he brought coffee or a sandwich. Sometimes he came empty-handed, but he always brought stories. Stories of business, people, and lessons life had taught him. Daniel enjoyed those moments. He listened more than he spoke, but his calm replies and honest words always made Mr. Collins reflect on his own life. For the first time in years, Mr. Collins found himself talking to someone without worrying about money, status, or image. Daniel treated him like a normal person, not a billionaire, and that felt refreshing. But while Daniel saw their conversations as friendly talks, Mr. Collins saw them as something deeper. He admired Daniel's patience, his discipline, and his quiet pride in doing the right thing. Still, he wondered if this goodness was truly part of Daniel's nature, or if it came only when someone was watching. To know the truth, Mr. Collins decided to test him, not out of doubt, but because he wanted to understand just how genuine Daniel's honesty was. One Friday night, after most of the office workers had gone home, Mr. Collins visited the building again. The rain was falling lightly outside, and Daniel was doing his usual round through the parking area. Mr. Collins greeted him with a smile and said, "You're still as punctual as ever, Daniel." Daniel smiled back. "I try my best, sir. It keeps me in routine." Mr. Collins laughed softly. "That's what I like about you. You take pride in small things most people overlook." "Maybe that's why I still enjoy the work," Daniel replied. "If I start taking it lightly, I'll stop doing it right." Mr. Collins nodded slowly, then said he would be heading up to one of the offices for a quick check on some files. He walked away, but as he reached the elevator, he quietly slipped off his expensive wristwatch and placed it near the corner of a potted plant in the lobby. It was a gold watch, worth more than Daniel's yearly salary. Mr. Collins knew that if someone found it and decided to keep it, no one would ever know. Daniel continued his patrol as usual, unaware of the small test waiting for him. Around midnight, as he made his way back to the lobby, his flashlight beam caught a glimmer on the floor. He bent down and saw the watch lying near the plant. It was clearly valuable. He picked it up gently, examining it under the light. The brand was one of those luxury names he had only seen in magazines. For a moment he stood still, thinking how strange it was that something so expensive could be left behind so carelessly. Then without hesitation, he walked to the front desk, filled out a lost item report, and placed the watch in the same lost and found box where he had once put the wallet weeks before. He didn't even think about keeping it. To him, it didn't matter if it was a wallet, a phone, or a watch. The rule was the same. "What's not mine should go back to its owner," he whispered as he locked the box. The next morning, when Mr. Collins returned to the building, he found Daniel standing at his post as usual, greeting workers as they arrived. Mr. Collins walked up to him and asked, pretending not to know, "Morning, Daniel. Everything all right during the night?" Daniel nodded. Yes, sir. Quiet as usual, although I did find something, a wristwatch near the plant by the elevator. I kept it safe in the lost and found box. It looks expensive. Maybe someone forgot it last night. Mr. Collins smiled slightly but kept his face serious. Good job, Daniel. I'll check with the office upstairs to see if anyone reports it missing. He walked away but could hardly hide the satisfaction in his heart. He went to the supervisor's office, retrieved the watch, and confirmed that Daniel had filled out all the correct paperwork with his signature and time of discovery. Everything was done properly without a single corner cut. That evening, Mr. Collins came back to the building and approached Daniel again. Daniel, he said softly, you remember that watch you found? Yes, sir, Daniel replied. Did the owner claim it? Mr. Collins smiled faintly. Yes, he did, and he was very grateful, though I think you already know who it belonged to. Daniel looked surprised. You mean, it was yours? Mr. Collins nodded. Yes. I wanted to see if your honesty was just a moment's thing or if it was truly part of who you are. Daniel looked embarrassed and lowered his head slightly. Sir, you didn't have to test me. I would never. I know, Mr. Collins interrupted kindly. That's exactly why I did it. Because I had a feeling you were that kind of man. You didn't disappoint me. Daniel smiled quietly. I just did what's right. My father used to say, do right even when no one sees you. That's when it counts the most. I try to live by that. Mr. Collins nodded, deeply touched by the simple wisdom in those words. Your father raised a good man, he said. The two men stood there for a moment in silence. Mr. Collins then said, Daniel, I want you to know something. You remind me of the person I used to be. When I was young, I believed honesty and kindness were enough to build a good life. But as I grew richer, I started thinking success was measured by numbers and power. Meeting you made me realize I was wrong. You've shown me that real success is in character, not wealth. Daniel was quiet for a moment before replying. I think we all forget sometimes, sir. Life keeps pushing us forward, and we stop looking at what really matters, but it's never too late to remember. That night, after Mr. Collins left, Daniel sat at his desk thinking about what had just happened. He wasn't angry about being tested. In fact, he understood why Mr. Collins had done it. It reminded him that no matter who we are, rich or poor, we all need to believe in something good about the world. The following week, something unusual began to happen. Daniel noticed that other workers in the building started treating him with more respect. The receptionist offered him coffee in the mornings. The janitor brought him a small snack during his shift, and even the supervisors greeted him with friendlier smiles. It was as if his quiet honesty had spread through the building without him realizing it. One night when Daniel arrived for his shift, his supervisor pulled him aside. Hey, Daniel, he said with a grin. You've got quite the fan in Mr. Collins. He's been talking about you a lot lately. Says you're the kind of man every company needs. Daniel chuckled softly. That's kind of him, but I'm just doing my job. The supervisor nodded. Yeah, but not everyone does their job with your kind of heart. Just thought you should know. Later that night, while checking the cameras, Daniel thought about his life again. He wasn't rich. He still lived in the same small apartment, still struggled with bills, still worried about his mother's health. But for some reason, he felt richer inside. Maybe it was because he knew that doing good had value beyond money. A few days later, Mr. Collins showed up again, but this time, he didn't come alone. With him was a man from his office who carried a folder. Mr. Collins smiled warmly at Daniel and said, Don't worry, this isn't a test. I just wanted to talk. Daniel nodded, curious. Mr. Collins asked, If I offered you a different kind of job, something better, with better pay, would you take it? Daniel looked a bit uncertain. I appreciate that, sir, but I like what I do. It's honest work, Mr. Collins smiled. That's exactly why I want you to consider it. I'm not offering charity, Daniel. I'm offering you an opportunity. I need someone trustworthy to handle a new security division I'm setting up for my company. Someone I can rely on. Daniel blinked in surprise. You mean, you want me to lead it? Yes, Mr. Collins said simply. You've proven your honesty, your sense of duty, and your heart. That's more valuable than any certificate. Daniel didn't know what to say. He had never imagined a life beyond his small desk and night patrols. I don't know if I'm qualified, he said softly. You are, Mr. Collins replied firmly. You just don't see it yet. That night, as Daniel walked home under the early morning sky, he thought about everything that had happened. The lost wallet, the friendship, the test, and now this offer. He looked up at the stars and smiled. Life had a strange way of testing people, he thought. Sometimes it was through hard times, sometimes through small choices. He didn't know what his answer would be yet. But he knew one thing for sure. Whatever he decided, he would stay the same person he had always been, humble, honest, and true to his heart. And while he didn't realize it yet, this was only the beginning of something far greater waiting for him ahead. The week after Mr. Collins offered Daniel a new position, life seemed to move in slow motion. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Every night during his shift, his mind kept drifting back to that moment when Mr. Collins had looked him in the eye and said, "You've proven your honesty, your sense of duty, and your heart." Those words echoed in his mind like a song that wouldn't fade. He hadn't given his answer yet. Part of him was deeply honored, but another part of him was scared. He had worked as a night security guard for so many years that he couldn't imagine himself doing anything else. His uniform, the silent halls, the routine, these had become part of who he was. The thought of changing it all made him uneasy. At home, his mother noticed his quietness. "You've been thinking about something," she said one evening as they ate dinner. "Your face says it," Daniel smiled faintly. "It's nothing bad, Ma, just work stuff." His mother gave him a knowing look. "When you start a sentence like that, it's always something important," Daniel sighed. "Mr. Collins offered me a better job, something bigger, but I don't know if I can handle it. I'm used to this life, simple and steady." She put down her spoon and looked at him with tired but loving eyes. "You've spent your whole life helping others, Daniel. If someone is offering you a chance to grow, maybe it's time to accept it. You deserve good things too." Her words stayed with him long after she went to bed. That night, as he walked to work, the cool wind brushed against his face. The streets were quiet, and he found himself thinking about everything he had gone through. The long nights, the loneliness, the times he doubted whether goodness even mattered in the world. Maybe this was the moment life was finally giving something back. When Daniel reached the building, Mr. Collins was already waiting in the lobby. He smiled warmly and said, "I thought I'd catch you before your shift began." Daniel looked surprised. "Sir, you didn't have to come all the way here." "I wanted to," Mr. Collins said. "You didn't answer my question the other night." Daniel hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "Sir, I'm honored, truly, but I don't know if I'm the right person. I've never managed people before." Mr. Collins placed a hand on his shoulder. "Daniel, you've been managing trust your whole life. That's more valuable than managing people. Skills can be learned. Character can't. I'll have someone train you. You just need to say yes." Daniel looked down, his hands tightening slightly around his cap. "It's hard to believe this is happening." Mr. Collins smiled. "That's the best part of life, Daniel. The best things come when you least expect them." There was a pause. Then Daniel finally nodded. "All right, sir. I'll do my best." Mr. Collins extended his hand and Daniel shook it firmly. It wasn't just a handshake, it was the start of a new chapter. The next few weeks were busy. Daniel began training for his new role as head of security for one of Mr. Collins's companies. He was nervous at first. The office was bigger, the people more professional, and the environment more demanding. But Daniel approached it the same way he had approached every job before, with honesty, humility, and hard work. Slowly, people began to notice. His calm nature earned him respect, and his decisions were always fair. One afternoon, while reviewing reports in his new office, he got a call from Mr. Collins. "How's my best hire doing?" the businessman said with a cheerful tone. Daniel chuckled. "Still learning, sir. But it's going well. Everyone's been helpful." "I never doubted that," Mr. Collins said. "Listen, Daniel, there's something I'd like you to attend tomorrow. It's our company's annual gathering. I'd like you there." "Me, sir?" Daniel asked, surprised. "I've never been to anything like that." "Well," Mr. Collins replied, "there's a first time for everything. Come dressed nicely. You won't regret it." Daniel wasn't sure what to expect, but he agreed. The next evening he arrived at the hotel where the event was being held. The hall was beautifully decorated with lights and flowers. Dozens of employees, managers, and guests filled the room. Daniel felt slightly out of place in his simple suit, but he smiled politely and stood quietly near the back, observing. When Mr. Collins saw him, he walked over and greeted him warmly. "I'm glad you came, Daniel." "Thank you for inviting me, sir," Daniel said, still a little nervous. As the event went on, speeches were given, awards were presented, and laughter filled the air. Daniel clapped for everyone, not expecting anything for himself. But near the end of the evening, Mr. Collins stepped onto the stage and took the microphone. The room grew quiet. "Tonight," he began, "we celebrate not only success but also the values that make success meaningful. I want to tell you all a story." Everyone listened as he began to speak about losing his wallet months ago, about the honest man who found it, and how that one simple act of integrity had changed his perspective on life. The audience murmured softly, clearly intrigued. Mr. Collins continued, "That man is standing among us tonight. His name is Daniel. He taught me that honesty and humility are the true measures of a person's worth." The entire room turned toward Daniel. He froze in place, not expecting to be called out like that. People began clapping, some even standing. Daniel's face turned red with embarrassment as Mr. Collins motioned for him to come forward. Slowly, Daniel walked to the stage. Mr. Collins placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Daniel didn't just return a wallet. He reminded me what integrity looks like. And because of that, I want to do something in return, not as a reward, but as a thank you for being the kind of person this world needs more of." He turned to the audience. "From today onward, Daniel will not only serve as our head of security, but also as our new ethics ambassador for the entire company. And that's not all." He paused, smiling. "I've also arranged for full medical support for Daniel's mother. Every expense will be covered." The hall erupted in applause. Daniel stood there, stunned. His throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. The sound of clapping filled the air, but all he could think about was his mother, how happy she would be to finally get proper treatment. He turned to Mr. Collins, his eyes slightly wet. "Sir, I don't know what to say. I never expected anything. I just tried to do what was right." Mr. Collins smiled kindly. "And that's exactly why you deserve it, Daniel." The applause grew louder. Some people even wiped away tears. In a world where success was often measured by numbers and fame, seeing a simple act of goodness being celebrated felt refreshing. Cameras flashed, recording the moment that would soon make its way to the internet, touching thousands of hearts. Later that night, when the event ended, Mr. Collins walked Daniel out to the parking area. "You did well tonight," he said warmly. Daniel laughed nervously. "I still can't believe all this is real." Mr. Collins looked at him thoughtfully. "It's real, Daniel. Sometimes the universe waits a long time to reward good people, but it always does, one way or another." When Daniel reached home, his mother was waiting up for him. He told her everything, and she began to cry softly. "You see, my son," she said, holding his hand, "your kindness has always been your strength. I told you one day it would come back to you." Daniel smiled through tears. "It's not about rewards, Ma, it's just nice to know it matters." He helped her to bed, then sat by the window looking out at the quiet night sky. The city lights shimmered below, but for the first time he felt like one of those lights was shining directly on him. He didn't feel proud, just grateful. Grateful that his simple belief in goodness had touched someone's heart. The next morning, he woke early, made tea, and called Mr. Collins to thank him again. But Mr. Collins only said, "You've already thanked me, Daniel. Just keep being who you are." As Daniel hung up, he smiled. Life had taken him on a journey he never asked for, but it had led him exactly where he was meant to be. And though the world now saw him as a hero, he still saw himself as what he had always been. A man doing his job, trying to live honestly in a world that often forgot what honesty looked like. What he didn't know yet was that his story, the one that began with a lost wallet and a quiet act of honesty, was now spreading far beyond his city. The video of his moment on stage was already being shared online, reaching people everywhere. And while Daniel slept peacefully that night, the world began to learn about the humble security guard whose goodness changed not just one man's life, but many. The morning after the company event, Daniel's phone wouldn't stop ringing. At first he thought something was wrong, but when he checked, he saw hundreds of messages and missed calls. His friends from work, old colleagues, and even people he didn't know were all reaching out to him. When he finally opened one of the messages, it read, "You're all over the news, man. Everyone's talking about you. Confused, Daniel opened a video link. It was a recording from the company event, the moment when Mr. Collins had shared his story and called Daniel on stage. The clip had already been viewed thousands of times. People had flooded the comments section, writing messages like, "This is what real humanity looks like, and we need more people like him in this world." Daniel sat there in silence, watching the video again and again. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. In just one night, his quiet act of honesty had become an inspiration to people he had never met. By the time he reached work, the world had already recognized him. When he entered the office, everyone clapped for him. Some even came up to shake his hand. He smiled shyly, trying to stay calm, though his heart was racing. He had never been the center of attention before. A few hours later, Mr. Collins walked into the building. He called Daniel into his office and greeted him with a proud smile. "I told you this story would reach people," he said. "The world notices real goodness even if it takes time." Daniel shook his head, still overwhelmed. "Sir, I didn't expect any of this. I just did what anyone should do." "That's exactly why it means so much," Mr. Collins said. "You didn't do it for attention. You did it because it was right. And that's why people trust your story." Soon journalists began calling the company. They wanted to meet Daniel, to interview him, to hear his version of the story. At first, Daniel didn't want to speak publicly. He didn't like being in the spotlight. But after some encouragement from Mr. Collins and his mother, he finally agreed to one interview. When the journalist arrived, Daniel sat nervously at the edge of his chair. The interviewer smiled and said, "Daniel, the world is inspired by your story. Tell us, what made you return that wallet that day?" Daniel thought for a moment and replied in his usual calm voice, "My mother always told me that we don't keep what's not ours. I didn't do anything special. I just followed what I believe is right. I think honesty is something we should practice every day, not just when people are watching." The journalist nodded, clearly moved. "And how do you feel now that your story has reached so many people?" Daniel smiled softly. "Grateful, but also a bit surprised. I'm happy if my story reminds people to be kind. The world needs more kindness." The interview aired that same evening. Within hours, his words spread across the internet. News channels picked it up, social media users shared his video, and soon Daniel's name became a symbol of integrity. People from different countries began sending him messages of appreciation. Some shared their own stories of honesty, saying his actions had inspired them to do the right thing. It was strange for Daniel. He had lived most of his life unseen, just another security guard doing his job in the background. Now suddenly he was known by millions. But even with all that attention, Daniel remained the same. He still greeted everyone politely, still arrived early for his shift, and still walked home quietly after work. One evening, after finishing his duties, Daniel received a call from Mr. Collins. "I want you to join me for dinner tomorrow night," the businessman said. "There's someone I want you to meet." The next day, Daniel showed up at a quiet restaurant. Mr. Collins was already there, sitting with two other people. One of them was a woman from a charity organization, and the other was a man who ran a training center for underprivileged youth. Mr. Collins smiled as Daniel joined them. "Daniel," he said, "I was thinking about how your story inspired so many people. I believe we can do something more with it. I want to start a small program in your name, something that helps others find jobs and teaches them about honesty and hard work. What do you think?" Daniel was speechless. "A program? In my name?" he asked, surprised. "Yes," Mr. Collins said. "We'll call it the Humble Path Initiative. It'll support people from low-income families who are trying to build a better life, and I want you to be the first ambassador." Daniel stared at him, unable to speak for a moment. He felt tears building in his eyes. "Sir, I don't have any special skills. I'm not used to speaking to crowds or leading programs." Mr. Collins smiled. "That's what makes you perfect for it. You're real. You understand what hard work means. People listen to someone who's lived it, not someone who just talks about it." Daniel finally nodded. "If it can help others, then I'll do it." From that day, his life took on a new meaning. When the program launched, hundreds of people showed up at the first event. Daniel stood on stage, nervous but determined. He looked out at the crowd, people who reminded him of his younger self, working hard, trying to make ends meet. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "I used to think that people like me didn't have much power. he said softly. But I learned something important, that one honest action can reach farther than you can imagine. You don't have to be rich or powerful to make a difference. You just have to do what's right even when no one is watching. The audience clapped warmly. Many wiped their eyes, touched by his words. Over the next few months, the program grew rapidly. Donations poured in and people volunteered to help. Daniel visited schools, small communities, and security training centers, sharing his story and encouraging others. He didn't talk about fame or fortune. He talked about values, about staying kind in a harsh world. And everywhere he went, people listened. But through it all, Daniel remained humble. He still lived in the same small apartment with his mother. He still cooked dinner for her every evening and visited his old workplace from time to time to check on his former colleagues. Whenever someone tried to praise him too much, he would simply smile and say, "I just did what anyone should have done." One afternoon, while visiting the park where he used to take breaks during his old shifts, a young boy approached him. The boy looked shy and nervous. "Sir," he said quietly, "my dad told me your story. I want to be like you when I grow up." Daniel knelt down and looked at him kindly. "You already are like me," he said. "Just keep being honest and helping others. That's all it takes." The boy smiled brightly and ran off to play. Daniel watched him for a moment, his heart full. That simple exchange reminded him why he had chosen this path, to remind others that even the smallest good actions could change lives. Months later, Daniel was invited to speak at a large conference attended by business leaders and community workers. It was his biggest audience yet. As he stood backstage, he felt the familiar nervousness return. He looked at the crowd, then thought about his mother, about Mr. Collins, about that day he found the wallet, all the little moments that had led him here. When he walked on stage, the applause was thunderous. But when he began to speak, his voice remained calm and sincere. "I never imagined my life would change because of one small decision," he said. "But maybe that's what life is about, the small moments that show who we really are. I was just a security guard doing my job, but one act of honesty opened doors I didn't even know existed. I'm not special. I'm just proof that doing the right thing still matters." The room was silent except for his voice. People leaned in, listening deeply. He ended his speech by saying, "If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: kindness and humility never go unnoticed. The world may forget many things, but it never forgets a good heart." When he stepped off the stage, people stood up and clapped loudly. Mr. Collins, sitting in the front row, smiled proudly. That night, when Daniel returned home, he found his mother sitting by the window watching the stars. She turned to him and said softly, "Your father would have been proud of you." Daniel smiled and sat beside her. "I just hope I've done enough to make a difference," he said. She placed her hand over his. "You already have, my son. You've reminded people what goodness looks like." As they sat there quietly, the night felt peaceful. Daniel looked out at the sky, filled with gratitude. His journey had started with nothing more than a simple act of honesty, but it had grown into something that touched lives far beyond his own. He realized then that true fortune wasn't about money or fame. It was about the respect and love one earned through sincerity. And in that quiet moment, he felt richer than any man alive. The story of the humble security guard continued to travel across the world, inspiring countless others. And though Daniel never sought fame, his name became a gentle reminder that goodness, no matter how small, always finds its way back home.